Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Marcus Allgood, also known as Ishma'il Abdul Haq. Go to my website at www.wanttherealtruth.com. The website is related to understanding Islam from an Islamic perspective, particularly from the Kalam school of the Mutazili. Now, the subject today is very controversial. Islam, Christianity, and terrorism. Here's the thing. Islam and terrorism, this is an interesting subject to me, being a former Pentecostal Christian minister, now a Muslim Khatib or a preacher. I have a intimate understanding of both faiths. So I hear Christians all the time exclaim that all Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. This is real reckless and dangerous talk here. It creates an environment of hostility from the masses, or particularly Christian masses, against Muslims. But how have we forgotten about Christianity's violent past? For example, in the Bible, God commanded Joshua to annihilate the Canaanites, meaning to kill men, women, and children. And since the Canaanites were considered guilty sinners, that's what the Bible says. And if you don't believe me, look at Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 5, and Deuteronomy 20, 16 through 18. And then going further in the Bible, you'll see centuries later, during the time of King Saul, the prophet Samuel said that it was God's will to annihilate the Amalekites because of their sins that they committed. They were not to spare them and put death to men, women, children, and infants, even the cattle and the sheep and the camels and the donkeys. And that can be found in 1 Samuel 15, 2 through 3. Now, what can be more terroristic than that? That's terrorism. You see, there's 842 violent references in the Bible and only 333 violent references in the Quran. Some Christian apologetics say, well, the Bible is a larger book than the Quran, thus it would have more violent references. To me, that is not a valid point at all, because it gives a believer, a Christian believer, more references to commit more violence. Well, some argue that the majority of those violent references is only in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament is all kumbaya and love and peace. Then how do you explain away the New Testament verses that has a couple killed for not tithing? And what about the Crusades? And don't forget about slavery, where millions died in the Middle Passage. Millions were died during slavery. Negroes were killed, lynched, and burnt. Even after the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, members of the Democratic Party in the United States here, so all you black folks that's so beholden to the Democratic Party, members of the Democratic Party organized the Protestant-led Ku Klux Klan. In the hood, we call them the KKK, and began engaging in arson, beating, destruction of property, lynching, murder, rape, tar and feather, whipping, and intimidation via, burning crosses. They targeted African Americans, so-called, Jews, Catholics, and other social and ethnic minorities. That's terrorism. Now, most Christians say, well, that's not representative of Christianity as a whole. I agree. So why we're not held to the same standard as Muslims? So a small group of Muslims create terrorist acts, and you want to do the broad stroke on all Muslims. If you want to use the same measure, then you have to measure these Ku Klux Klan. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. What about members of groups such as the Army of God? They began attacking abortion clinics and doctors across the United States. Is that terrorism? In 2011, analyst Daryl Johnson of the United States Department of Homeland Security said that the Houthi Christian militia movement possessed more weapons than combined weapon holdings of all Islamic terror defendants charged in the U.S. since September 11 attacks. What are they preparing for? Armageddon? There has been more mass shootings on American soil by so-called shooters other than Muslims. There's more mass shootings in the United States than there have been by Muslims. That is a mathematical fact. But they keep telling us about Islamic terrorism, like someone is throwing the rock at you and hiding their hands behind their back. I'm pointing this out because Christians keep acting like they are innocent and that their hands are not dripping with blood. It is Christian nations that most of the nukes and vast military forces are behind. Who's dropped bombs on countries and destroyed whole nations and dropped nukes? To me, that's terrorism. Most of the violence in the world is mostly a response to Western imperialism and oppression. They support oppressive regimes and dictatorships so they can get the oil and the diamonds and the rubber from Africa and the Middle East. The only thing standing in the way of total domination is Islam. Therefore, Islam is now the enemy. Excuse me. So I'm not opposed to violence myself, only I support self-defense. Islam doesn't endorse terrorism. Let me get that straight. Islam does not endorse terrorism. No killing of yourself. That is haram and forbidden in Islam. But defending yourself, defending your family and your essential material possession, that is allowed. That is your God-given right. That is your natural right and plain old common sense. And Islam also allows us to fight against injustice, because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I'm not here to say that Islam can't be violent. It can be, and sometimes it's necessary to create peace. Islam means peace, but it doesn't mean passive peace. Sometimes you have to step up and defend your family, defend your nation. And some people abuse and misinterpret the permission given by Islam to defend or to fight. The Quran says if you're an aggressor, we should join up against you, even if you are Muslim, especially if you're a Muslim. The Quran says if you take a life unjustly, it is as if you killed all mankind. So this is my perspective on terrorism. None of our hands are without blood. Peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum.